We're going to take some notes on section 5 of chapter 6, which is percent of increase and decrease. So I want you to write down all the notes. You don't need to understand everything completely, but you should have a basic understanding. So first we're going to start with the percent that a quantity changes from the original amount is always a positive number. So our percent of change always has to be a positive number. So write down this equation, write down all these notes. If you need to pause the video, pause the video. So the percent of change is the amount of change over the original amount times 100. The times 100 gives us a percentage. So I'm going to have you write these both down. So pause the video, write down the notes. Okay, so you should have written down the notes. So you notice here's my percent of increase. So because the numbers increase and I don't want a negative, I always want a positive, we start with the new amount minus the original over the original. Notice on both of these, it's always over the original amount. Percent of decrease, you know my number's getting smaller, so we start with the original number minus the new amount. I recommend you put these on note cards, flashcards, so you can have them and use them while doing the homework and to help study for the test or the quiz. So you'll need to know these different equations when you're using them and how to use them. So make sure those are in your notes. So you're going to write this down in your notebook. So we're going to start to use those equations. So hopefully you have them on a note card. Example 1, finding a percent of change. So in 1967, a 30-second Super Bowl commercial cost $40,000. In 2000, I should update this to 2020, a 30-second commercial cost $1,800,000. What is the percent change in the cost of a commercial? So you're going to write all this down. You can put this in your notebook so you have it as an example. So if you need to pause the video, pause the video. So percent change. So first, was that an increase or a decrease? Again, you're writing all this down. So if you need to pause the video, you're going to pause the video. Okay, so we know it was an increase. So we're going to use that formula. So first, write down the formula that you're going to use. This way you remember the formula. Okay, so I'm going to use a percent of increase formula. And then I'm going to plug in what I know. So my new amount minus the original amount divided by the original. And yes, you can use a calculator. Just make sure you know how to use a calculator and that you're doing the correct order of operation. You can't blame your calculator for a wrong answer. So this was a 4,400% increase. Maybe we should look up what today's like. So this should all be in your notes. Again, if you need to pause the video, pause the video. If you have a question, write that down in your notes so that you can ask tomorrow during class. Okay, next example. Finding a percent of change. Okay, so again, you're writing this down. You're writing down the whole thing so you have it as an example. You sent 135 text messages yesterday, but today you sent 108. What is the percent change? Okay, so first, again, is it an increase or a decrease? Well, this was a decrease, so I'm going to use that formula. Okay, so now I'm going to take my original number, which was 135, minus my 108, divided by the original, which was 135. Again, yes, you can use your calculator, but make sure you're using the correct order of operation, and you get a 20% decrease. So again, this should all be in your notes. If you need to pause the video, pause the video. Okay. Differences in phrases used. So increased by 150% versus increased to 150% are different. Increased by 150%, I've increased the whole thing by 150. Whereas increased to 150, I've only increased it 50%. So make sure you have those written in your notes, and we're going to practice those and look at those as well. So if you need to pause the video, pause the video. Okay, on your own. You're going to write this in your notebook. You're going to write down the equation, and then you're going to solve. So you should see a text box on the right that after you've solved it, you can put your answer in. So at this point, you probably need to pause the video, do the math in your notebook, and then give me an answer. Okay, so here's the answer. So check your notes in your notebook. So you're going to either mark yours correct or not. If it's not, please copy down the correct way to solve these. So notice I looked to first, was it an increase or a decrease? and then I plugged in what I knew, and then I used my handy dandy calculator. So again, if you need to pause the video, pause the video. If you're ready to move on, move on. Percent error. This is a good one. The percent that an estimated quantity differs from the actual amount. So write that in your notes so you have it. Again, if you need to pause the video, pause the video. You might want to make another flashcard. So percent error equals the amount of error over the actual amount. Okay, so here's my example, example 3, percent error. You estimated that you would score 70 on a quiz, but you actually scored a 92. Woohoo! What is your percent error? Okay, so first, I am going to write down my equation. Okay, my error, my amount error is what's the difference between the two numbers. Kind of like what we were just doing. So it was 92 minus 70 over the original, so 31% error. So write that in your notebook. If you have a question, or if you don't know where a number came from, you can circle it and write that in your notebook. We can go over those questions tomorrow during class. Okay, on your own, write out the equation and solve. So you predicted 20 inches of rain this year, but there were only 8. What is the percent of error? So pause the video, do the calculation in your notebook, and then put the answer in the text box on the right. All right, here's my answer. Check that with your answer. If you need to pause the video to correct that, great. If not, go ahead and move on. We're all done. Woohoo! So you will need your calculator tomorrow during class so that we can do all of these problems.